So thank you for the introduction. It's an honor to do this presentation. Last year, I was also here doing an overview of the Busan City Debate Project, which was kind of the background for this research study that I did. This year, Kato-san asked me to do a little bit more of a comprehensive overview of the actual research study that was done, which is this particular paper. So this was a paper that was published in Speech and Communication, which is a KCI journal, which is a registered journal in the Korean research area. So again, a brief background is the Busan City Project. And this is a city that was suffering from a brain drain. And this started in 2011 when I became affiliated with the current mayor of Busan. He was particularly worried that this is a young city, which is not a bad thing. It's one of the few quite young cities with an average age of 32.9, but poor educational framework leading a lot of the young families with children to move away from the city once the kids hit grades 4 to 5. They felt that once you get to about grade 5, then you start preparing for university education, and they felt that the framework in Busan was not sufficient to maximize their kids' abilities. So in addition to that, teachers also didn't like being in Busan either because of this educational environment. So once their minimum period of service of the first 2 years after they graduate from the educational graduate school and get their teacher certificate, they would oftentimes request reassignment to a different city so that they don't have to stay within Busan. So the context is teachers in Korea are considered government workers, and they circulate from school to school, but still within the same general region. Teachers in Busan didn't like that, or staying in that area. Another thing that I had to deal with was, although the mayor of Busan was interested in revamping the education system and met with me, and we talked about incorporating debate into the education program as one of the measures to boost up the education programs in Busan. There was a broad misconception that debate is for elite students only, and that any debate tournaments or any debate club activities disproportionately prioritizes really good students and kind of leaves the average or poor students behind. And there was a bit of a political backlash, especially in the city council, against this kind of a measure. So the belief was also that it leads to private education in debate because there are debate tournaments, and that leads to a downgrading of public education. I wanted to break this misconception, primarily because I was largely influenced by a lot of the projects that were taking place in America, such as the Urban Debate League, debate across the curriculum initiatives, and so forth that took place during the mid-2000s, which really did tend to show that students who were from lower socioeconomic backgrounds or students in poor situations, students who are demotivated, tend to actually benefit a lot from debate education, which is why I thought that debate would fit especially well in the context of Busan. So what I did was targeting maladaptive youths in the city of Busan. And maladaptive youths fell into broadly 3 categories: students who bully other students, students who are bullied by other students, and as a result, cannot engage in school activities. I think Japan has also experienced similar kinds of things, like ijime and so forth. And then finally, students who withdraw from school life or studies for different reasons. So what we did do was do a little bit of a background for research when writing the paper. And as a little bit of a background, Korea ranks extremely highly in academic achievement. I think it's a very similar context to Japan, so I think you'll relate to this quite well. According to the PISA, Program for International Student Assessment, Korea ranked number 1 in math, number 1 or 2 in reading abilities, number 2 to 4 in science, but satisfaction, not so good. So 56.3% of students state that they are dissatisfied with school life. So compared to the performance levels, the satisfaction levels are very, very low. Especially with regards to maladaptive students. So a lot of the students who are dissatisfied with school life end up being maladaptive, and they exhibited poor communication abilities and social competence, and then that links to violent behaviors. which hurts not only them, but obviously kids that they are affecting as well. Previous research on improving communication and social competence had focused on classic counseling and communication models, especially in the context of helping maladaptive students in Korea. So what we wanted to do was to apply debate to see how it does affect maladaptive students. The team that I put together for this was, I would be the debate person, and I would be the person who implements debate programs in the city of Busan. But I did want someone with a strong background in dealing with maladaptive students in general. So we had one person who was a professional counselor and a doctoral student at a local university who would help out with the theoretical concept in that area. And although I did have statistics classes and did some of that stuff as a student when I was a student earlier on in my career, after I went into law and debate and negotiation, a lot of my analysis wasn't statistically oriented, it was much more qualitative. Therefore, I did want someone on the team who was able to perform tests, statistical analysis, quantitative analysis for our team. So it was a three-member team, myself being the debate person, one person being an expert in child psychology and counseling, and maladaptive individuals, and one person in statistics. So the key questions that we wanted to ask were these. Do communication abilities of students participating in debate programs increase? And again, this is in the context of maladaptive students. Does it increase? Second, does social competence of maladaptive students participating in debate programs increase? So communication abilities, and then social competence. And then thirdly, is there a difference in improvement of communication abilities and social competence between students who participate in debate programs and those who do not? So first two questions is a before and after analysis of the same group, experimental group. Third question is evaluating them with a control group, just to make sure that it is the debate program that is leading to these improvements, as opposed to some externalities or other factors. So literature review that we did, just a brief overview. There was an evaluation of maladaptive students that showed that long-term effects existed that extended into jobs and societal adaptation. So it's not just about you're like this in school, and then once you graduate, you grow up and become much more mature and are able to become adaptive individuals in society. Maladaptation in schools tends to extend long-term, so you become maladaptive individuals in society. These individuals are oftentimes characterized by poor communication. Sometimes they're too quiet, sometimes they're too aggressive, lack of motivation or confidence for studies, social interaction, and so forth. We also did an evaluation of how communication ability and social competence for maladaptive students look like, and pretty much the literature review showed that it's important for maladaptive students to improve on these two key areas to develop and socially adapt. And then finally, we did an evaluation of debate on communication and social competence in general, although it wasn't on maladaptive students. And generally, it tended to show that it has a strong impact on communication abilities, and debate was shown to have an impact on social competence. And just because he's here, one of the studies that we did look at was the one that Professor Inoue did with Professor Nakano as well in 2004 and 2006, which was relevant to individuals in non-English speaking environments. But in general, I think the research was consistent along those lines. So the methodology that we used, I wouldn't say that the research design is entirely innovative or extremely creative. It's just a very simple designation of a control group, experimental group, doing a before and after analysis and a comparative cross-group analysis to control for other factors. So we had 31 students, 15 in the control group, 16 experimental group. These were all students at Osan Middle School, all 31 of them being male. All of them had been designated for counseling as maladaptive students. All 31 of these were categorized as being in the bullies category, as opposed to those who are being bullied or being maladaptive for other reasons. Research design and process, we did a pre-program survey on all 31 of these students. Then we ran a debate program of 60 to 90 minutes each, 8 sessions weekly for 8 weeks. This was done for obviously the experimental group. The control group did not have access to this, but they did continue to receive counseling through their normal school program. And then what we did was a post-program survey of both the control group and the experimental group. Survey and measures used for communication abilities, we used the one that's developed by the Korea Education Foundation. Again, because the context is Korean students, this was looked upon as the most authoritative measure to use. For social competence, we used the ICQ, which is the Interpersonal Competence Questionnaire by Burmester et al., adapted into Korean category by another Korean researcher. And we used the independent t-test for the before and after measures, and then the paired samples t-test for the cross samples test. So here are the results. Pre-program survey, we obviously want to see that the control group and experimental groups aren't different from the outset, right? So the analysis showed that there are no significant differences in both communication ability and social competence between control group and experimental groups. And it's all in Korean because it was published in a Korean journal. So this is all communication abilities sub-factors, and I'll go into some of them in depth. And these are all of the social competence sub-factors that we did measure. And as you can see, the t-test scores, none of them were statistically significant in terms of exhibiting any sort of difference between the two groups. And results of the post-program survey showed that there was a significant difference between two groups in both communication ability and social competence. So for communication abilities, we're able to see these extremely significant measures in these categories. So you're able to see a difference in information gathering, active communication, listening. This is information gathering, listening, self-exposure, and active communication, these 4 categories, as well as the overall category of communication abilities. So all of these exhibited significant positive change. And for social competence, we're able to see significant changes in self-exposure and overall social competence, okay, in the before and after analysis. And again, a simple t-test comparing the before and after of the two groups. Okay, and we also, of course, looked at the difference in improvement between the two groups, and both groups did improve to a certain extent. And again, we saw a significant difference in improvement between the two groups in communication ability and social competence, although not to the extent of just the before and after evaluation of the experimental group. So meaning, in terms of information gathering, we see a significant improvement, listening abilities, significant improvement, self-exposure, significant improvement, active communication, and overall communication abilities, significant improvement. But in terms of social competence, some of the abilities that we saw significant improvements on were not quite as significant when doing a cross-check between the two groups. So we did see a significant improvement in terms of self-exposure and overall social competence, but not so much in some of the other areas, even though all of them did generally indicate positive things, with the one exception of creative communication abilities, and I'll touch upon that a little bit in the discussion section. As well as this one, which is understanding others' views. So here's a discussion of the study. In terms of communication ability, as I said, we did see significant improvements in both input and output communication skills. And input meaning things such as information gathering, either through research, reading, and so forth, and as well as through listening skills. Output being active communication, self-exposure, all of these did show significant improvement. And that wasn't surprising, because if we look at the characteristics of debate, the way it is designed, it directly impacts these areas. So for example, debate has the requirement of impromptu responses as opposed to just presenting prepared material. So it's different from just normal public speaking courses or speaking activities. in that you do have to immediately listen to and provide some output. You have points of information that also require you to listen to and immediately react to things that are happening at that time. The model that I used, the model of debate that I used also employed team conferral periods, which is also something that requires you to communicate between team members. So again, this directly impacts things like this in terms of communication ability. And finally, because I had students participating as judges, so obviously when we have 16 individuals, not all of them can be debating at the same time. So students who are debating were participating as judges and learning to judge debates and give decisions as they were. All of these designs I felt were specifically relevant to these kinds of categories of communication abilities. But then there were no significant improvements in some other communication ability categories, such as overcoming biases, understanding others' views, and creative communication. And some of them did indicate insignificant positive effects, but in some cases, actually, it indicated slightly negative effects. And for this, one limitation is that it was only an 8-week program, so it's not a long-term program that we were able to measure. So maybe it wasn't enough to overcome things like deeply held beliefs or biases or views. Okay, so we did feel that there was a bit of a limitation in terms of the study, although I think broadly it's been shown that in terms of overcoming deeply held beliefs, because you're debating both sides of many issues, sometimes forced to debate a side that you're not accustomed to or personally believe, perhaps the aspect of overcoming biases is helped as a result of being involved in debate. But we also are interested in the fact that in terms of creative communication or understanding other views, the aspect of debate or the art of debating is definitely focused upon more rational, logical, analytical, critical thinking and communication, more so than creative thinking and communication. And yes, we do have to think outside the box oftentimes to come up with arguments, but I think we definitely do not credit people for being extremely creative with argumentation, especially if they're not relevant to the case at hand. So definitely there is much more of a prioritization in terms of rational, critical thinking, as opposed to creative thinking in terms of debate. So even if there may be some sort of an impact in that area, it certainly isn't to the extent of the other aspects, which are a little bit more directly relevant. In terms of social competence, there are significant improvements in self-exposure, assertion of rights or complaints, interaction/relationships, or social competence in general. And that makes sense again, right? Because if we point to each of the traits that we are training people to do as a part of debate, they all relate to these categories. Debate trains people to speak one's views, even under adverse circumstances. Okay? Even when you are being questioned by an opposition that is also trained to attack your viewpoints. Oftentimes in situations where you don't get a lot of positive feedback, either from the audience or from people who are debating with you. So obviously, assertion of your rights or complaints or self-exposure in these kinds of environments tend to be improved. You're also trained to argue against the status quo or provide a policy. And this again has a direct impact on your ability to assert your own rights, okay, when your rights are being violated. Okay? Or if you see some sort of an injustice, being able to complain about those things in a persuasive manner. So again, it's not surprising that debate has a positive impact in this category. Thirdly, you're also trained to collaborate with teammates. You're also trained somewhat to communicate professionally with opponents. Like we tend not to want to do ad hominem attacks or be extremely rude or derogatory even to our opponents, as well as to judges at the end, even if you don't necessarily agree with everything that they say in terms of the decisions. And you certainly don't agree with things that your opponents are saying in a debate, but you're still trained to be professional under those circumstances. So that has a direct impact on interaction or relationships and social competence in general. So that's not surprising. There are no significant improvements in emotional support, however. And Again, maybe that's not so surprising because debate is designed as an adversarial process. So it's much more modeled after a third party deciding on a winner as opposed to you trying to convince the other side that you're debating with. So it's much more like elections, okay, where political candidates are bashing each other, or a court procedure where you're definitely trying to beat the other side by convincing a third party as opposed to convincing the counterpart. So it looks much more like that as opposed to like a negotiation process where you're trying to go for something like a win-win or a collaboration or something like that. So maybe that isn't catered so much for emotionally supporting each other. It's much more for an aggressive adversarial process. There's obviously some indirect engagement with views that are not in line with personal beliefs, and you obviously have to emotionally support your teammates and so forth, but that's much more indirect part of just normal social interactions as opposed to a focus of debate education in itself. So again, it's maybe not surprising that emotional support doesn't show significant improvement. In some cases, it's a little bit more negative compared to students who are engaged in just counseling sessions. Also, there are less differences in improvements between the two groups, especially in terms of social competence. And again, that wasn't surprising because the sample groups of the students, control group wasn't a group that was doing nothing. This was a group that was engaged in counseling activities, right? And counseling activities tends to focus upon social competence, more so than communication abilities. And that makes sense because social competence, bad social competence often leads to bad behavior that is immediately causing trouble in schools, such as violence, bullying, and so forth. Therefore, it does focus upon that. So therefore, maybe the fact that they were involved in those activities did lead to a markedly lower impact in that category when I'm comparing the two groups. But it did tend to show that there might be a synergy effect if debate programs are run simultaneously with counseling sessions, although that would need to have a separate study that compares the improvement of just students who are doing counseling versus just students who are not doing counseling, but only debate sessions. But certainly doing both of them does not hurt. So lastly, some suggestions for future research and understanding the limitations of the present research. And I have 6 suggestions. One is obviously go for a larger sample size than 31, because that led to 15 and 16, which is not huge. Also more diverse samples, so different genders instead of just male students, and different age groups instead of just middle school students, maybe looking at impacts on elementary school students or high school students would be very interesting. That's a little bit ideal though. I know how difficult it is to get samples like this. It was a very unique situation in Osan city and a school that was very cooperative and wanting to collaborate with me in doing this kind of thing. In fact, after a few years, even that school got rid of this program for debate, even though it was so effective. They got rid of this program for maladaptive students involved in debate because there were arguments from both the vice principal and other teachers in that school that this is giving privileges to students who don't deserve privileges. As in, why are you giving this extra attention and education for kids who are bullies and harming students? Why are you rewarding them for that behavior? So that was the argument from them. And because of that opposition, this program, even though they still have the same debate club that was usually originally formed of these maladaptive students, now that club is composed of students who help maladaptive students to provide counseling to their peers as opposed to students who used to receive counseling. So there's that. So again, ideal, but it'd be nice if something like that could be designed. Second recommendation, effective other forms of debate. And I'm especially interested in this because we did use a parliamentary style, although it's a bit of a reformed parliamentary style. I designed the debate process in Osan, kind of bringing in parliamentary with aspects of policy/public forum. The portion I brought in is cross-examination and team preparation time. And the reason I did that was for educational purposes. I wanted to encourage the maximum amount of interaction possible, both between teammates as well as during the debate itself. That ended up becoming branded as Osan Debate, and now it's used in their tournaments. I never intended that to happen. What I wanted was them to use that for education and then use that in used like parliamentary debate in tournaments, but they thought it was cool and decided that they're going to brand this as Ulsan debate. So there it is. It's one of the more popular debate formats now. But I would like to see how other forms of debate have an effect, because I think other studies have been done with regards to policy debating, and I think some of the presentations that we've had in terms of other forms of debate is quite interesting. I'd like to see how they impact maladaptive students, but also not just formal debate, but also slightly other informal modes of debate, like roundtable discussions. What kind of impact does that have? Or negotiation trainings, what does that have compared to debate trainings? It'd be interesting to see. Thirdly, examination of debate on passive maladaptive students. So this was for bullies. So what I would call active maladaptive students, or the more aggressive maladaptive students. What about who are students who are victims of bullying, or people who aren't so easy, like students who are accustomed to putting themselves out, just not in positive ways, not through verbal means, people who are withdrawn, introverted. Does debate have a similar effect on them? Okay, so that's another study that I think would be very interesting. Effect of longer term programs. So obviously we only had 8 weeks to do this, so it was a very controlled setting. I really do think that if this program had gone on for a longer period of time, some of the areas that we did not see significant improvement might have seen significant improvement, because there were definitely some examples of students from this particular high school who did really become quite different in terms of how they treated others and the personal viewpoints that they had, as well as kind of the academic improvement areas as well. So like one student in particular ended up, like bully, bottom of the class, but then within the span of one semester ended up getting the first place speaker award in their in-school competition, even when he was competing against the top level students. And then the next year, this team composed of former bullies ended up being the winners of the citywide competition. So definitely qualitative, I don't want to say data, but examples that we can see that would suggest a longer term program like this has even greater impacts in a broader array of areas. But it wasn't something that we could measure using quantitative measures. I would also see value in looking at a control group, like I said, that does not participate in any programs. So this was limited to comparing students who are in counseling sessions plus debate programs versus students who are just in counseling sessions. There's a bit of an ethical problem. Like you see kids with problems, you kind of stay on your own. We're not going to deal with you while we help just this group. So I think a bit of an ethical problem to this, but I don't know if there's a natural way to allow for this to happen. It might be an interesting way to compare, or I guess you can say one group just does counseling, one group just does debate, and see what kind of an impact that has. In this case, we couldn't tell half of the students who are assigned to counseling to say, stop getting counseling, just do debate. So therefore, we weren't able to do something like that. So limitations in terms of reality, but that could lead to more pure outcomes in terms of the impact of debate. And then finally, sixth recommendation I would have is comparing to groups of normal or high-performing students to see a difference in effect between such groups and maladaptive students. Honestly, I tried to do this in Ulsan as well, but unfortunately I met opposition from even within the school. They didn't want to subject students who are normal students or high-performing students to these kinds of psychological or surveys, because they felt that it was, again, there was even opposition to have this program in the first place. It was very difficult to make this go beyond just this group of 31 students. But if that could be done, then I think it would be very nice to compare them to other groups of individuals who are not classified as maladaptive students. Because again, I think there are prior studies that have been done, as well as test examples within our own Ulsan Middle School case, that shows that students who are maladaptive tend to actually improve much more quickly than students who are normal or students who are kind of high performing. I think studies done in the United States do show that African Americans or Latino students tend to improve more drastically than white students or students who had already been doing well. So again, something like this being done in the Korean or Asian context would be, Northeast Asian context would be quite interesting to see. So these are recognitions of limitations of the study that I was able to perform, as well as recommendations to all of you who are here to see if you might be able to implement something like this, either on your own or in concert with myself or other researchers. Okay, so I guess that's the end of the discussion of the study itself. I guess if I were to just give an update on the Busan debate program in general, while this kind of died a sad death in terms of this program, now we don't have this for maladaptive students. Busan City Debate Project itself has gotten extremely popular and strong. The mayor enjoyed political gains. He was re-elected for the third time with, I think, 74% of the population voting for him. So very, very strong win for him. Korean law has it so that you can only be re-elected 3 times and then you're done. So I'm not sure what he's going to do. And I'm not sure if the next mayor will support the Busan Debate Project. But it certainly has become a brand name within the Korean community. And they've started a national tournament, which I was at immediately before coming to Kyushu Debate Open. The biggest program is Korean language debate for elementary, middle, and high school students, the largest of its kind in Korea that uses the Busan Debate name. And Busan is kind of the center of debate for Korean language debate. Students from all around the country come and compete. Seoulbridge, because I was making an MOU between Seoulbridge and Busan, also received an award from AACSB, which is an accreditation agency internationally. We were the only country, only institution in Northeast Asia. So 300 institutions applied for this award. We got an innovation award from the AACSB for our project in Busan as well. So kind of a mutual benefit for Busan City, Mayor, their education program, and our school. So that's kind of an update on what's happened in Busan. If you have any questions or any suggestions, I'm happy to hear.
Okay, thank you, Joshua. So, any questions?
Thank you for the presentation. So I've actually done quite a similar thing. Is that so I tried to, as a high schooler, I tried to get other people in my area who are, according to the Japanese academical metric, not so smart, to join debating. But there was quite a lot of backlash because these, I don't want to categorize them, but like we tried to get them, like there are all sorts of benefits to debating. For example, learning English, or like you get to know about all these skills and all these rights and social like that. And but it was really hard for me to do that because, well, it's kind of like I'm forcing them to do so because they don't have any motivation. And especially for like your case, it must be quite difficult to motivate them. So like, and according to your presentation, you have gotten quite, in some areas, gotten sort of significant changes. So is there like any process of how you encourage these students to debate?
So one advantage that I had was these were students who were forced to go through at least some sort of a corrective measure. So the normal corrective measure would be to be engaged in counseling sessions. So in addition to counseling sessions, now they're saying as a part of this corrective measure, you have to do this debate program. So it was a little bit enforced. That doesn't obviously enforce them to be motivated, but I think I am a strong believer that once you experience debate, it is a little bit self-motivating in itself. I think it's a self-motivating activity. And I think studies show that it is especially motivating to students who are a little bit more active in terms of like, students who tend to be bullies tend to be motivated by debate a little bit more. Okay, the reason for that is these are students who are a little bit more used to being forceful. Okay, and sometimes that leads them to be very good athletes, like they become good soccer players or basketball players. That's how they get motivated. And actually some of the activities in Korea for these maladaptive students is to get them involved in sports activities. So I think debate actually fits along that process quite well, except now it's related to academics as opposed to academics, but fun, competitive environment. For passive students, I'm not quite sure how it would apply. I would like to think, because I'm a fan of debate, that it kind of motivates them to put themselves out and experience a little bit of success along with failure, and that will get them to be more confident. But again, I'm not quite sure. In terms of just getting these students without this kind of an enforcement measure, it's a lot of, so this is where I really utilize the skills of the professional counselors. They have ways in which to get people kind of to start doing things that they don't really love. I think they give them candy and like do ice-breaking activities and try this thing and hello. So I wasn't a part of that first process, but definitely I think that had a large impact in terms of kids buying into this process in general. So I don't think I can say get a professional counselor for your first try, but definitely do a little bit of studies into kind of the ice-breaking activities. You don't want to just bring these kids and say, hey, debate theory 101, learn first principles. That's probably not the best way to introduce them into debate. One thing that did grow out of this is, and like we've done a little bit more of a study into this, because one of the good impacts of this is that we do have now a nationwide program that's been developed for maladaptive students. It has 5 categories. One of the 5 categories is academic competence, and academic competence has been designed around debating. So myself and 2 other researchers ended up developing that program. And the first part of that really is icebreaking. So I might be able to share some of those things with you. It's all in Korean, but I think I can probably help to not translate it, but explain some of it to you in English if necessary. Okay.
So any other question?
Prior to your study, have you cross-examined the effect of other kind of alternative measures through counseling in terms of helping the social competency or communication skill of the maladaptive student? For example, like working on other intellectually demanding projects such as building some robots or things like that. And were there qualitative and quantitative difference with the result of the debating or this kind of discussing program?
So literature research into social competence and activities that are catered around developing social competence, as I said, definitely catered around traditional counseling activities, as well as other kind of friendship building activities. One of the things that I did discover, not while I was doing this study, but afterwards when I was developing the nationwide program, was that especially for these maladaptive students, they do a lot of the physical activities, or playing games, or going to cooking together, those kinds of things. So I think all of those things are definitely useful. Was I able to compare the impact of those activities versus debate? Absolutely not. I think designing something like that would require a lot more than, obviously you need to have control group, students who are doing this activity, students who are doing debate, and so forth. Even doing this was extremely difficult. Designing something like that would be, I don't want to say impossible, but pretty difficult as well. So no, I haven't been able to do something statistically significant in that area. So it's pretty much just guesswork into, that is obviously effective, but this is equally, if not more effective, is what I would like to argue.
So, other questions? Okay, thanks, Joshua.